The Poetic and Prophetic Books. 13. Zechariah and Malachi. Zechariah 520 to 487 BCE. Like Haggai, Zechariah appears to have been of the company of 50,000 who first returned from the captivity under the leadership of Zerubbabel. He was associated with Haggai in actively encouraging the people to rebuild the temple and in urging the religious motives thereto. Wow, you really worry if they were building a secular temple. But Isaiah chapter 5, verse 1, 6, verse 14, there is a reason for believing that he was at this time a young man, chapter 2, verse 4, and therefore that he was born during the captivity. There are also indications that, like Jeremiah and Ezekiel, he was of the order of the priests. The first date in the book we find to be in the same year which Haggai's prophecies were uttered. The second date is about 2 years later. The last part of the book is probably much later still and has been by some authors supposed to be written by some other author or authors. The contents of the book may be embraced in 4 divisions. 1, the introduction comprising the first 6 verses. 2, a series of visions which are intended for the most part to encourage the people with promises of the future prosperity as a consequence of reformation and obedience. These extend to the end of the 6th chapter. 3, the third division comprises chapters 7 and 8 and discusses the question of keeping up with the days of fasting and humiliation which have been observed by the Jews several times in the year during their captivity. Humiliation doesn't sound right as something that would be prophetic. Contrition, yes, but humiliation, no. Mingled, just like shame. Shame's not a noble virtue. Guilt can be used properly. Shame can be used properly too, but, mingled with the discussion are many reflections of a moral and spiritual character growing not inaptly out of the subject. 4, the last division contains denunciations against some of the contemporary nations and promises of prosperity to God's people with various predictions concerning Christ. Malachi 397 BCE. Of the personal history of the last of the Old Testament prophets, nothing is known except of the time of his ministry as indicated by his writings. This must have been about 100 years after the time of Haggai and Zechariah. The temple is spoken of as then existing, and so must have been already built. He speaks of the governor, chapter 1, verse 8, the same term being used in Nehemiah and nowhere else. It must therefore have been during the administration of that eminent ruler. This is further evident from the fact that the vices and immoralities which he rebukes are the very same that Nehemiah was striving during the latter part of his official life to abolish. Life isn't official, but his official life, unofficial life. It appears that after the secure reestablishment of the Jews in their own land and the rebuilding of the temple, the fortification of the city, the people had grown irreligious and selfish and sensual. They had not relapsed into idolatry, but their vices were largely such as we see today in some professedly Christian communities. And it's obviously much, much worse nowadays, but where a spirit of carnality and worldliness has come in, and where vital piety has given place to formality, carelessness, and general neglect of duty, he severely reproves the priests who dishonor God by their indifference and hypocrisy. He also rebukes the popular sins of the time. He pointedly alludes to the coming of the Messiah and gives some of the characteristics of his coming. The prophecy and Old Testament canon end with the prediction of the final catastrophe and the promise that before that there shall appear the forerunner to prepare the people for Christ's advent. With whom was Zechariah associated during a part of his ministry? And at what time in his life was this? Where was he probably born? What dates do we have in the book itself determining the times of a portion of its contents? What differences of opinion have there about the latter portion of the book? Give the general division of the book. Give some account of the vision in the second part. What inquiry was made of the prophet by some of the leaders? 7:3. What had been their custom during the captivity? 7:5, 8:19. What does the prophet represent as of far greater value than outworn fasting? 7, 9, and 10, 8, 16, 17. In the Islamic tradition, we're not told not to fast. We're told that, our actions can spoil our fast. 7, 9, 10. Just like charity, it's not that you don't take part in charity or helping others. It's that when you follow with reminders, oh, look at what I did for you, and insults, oh, you disabled person, you can't do anything, and we have to help you out. It's like, well, you're worse than the people who do nothing. It doesn't mean you still shouldn't do what you do, but you should just treat the people with dignity. What pleasant picture does he make of the future prosperity of God's obedient people? 8, 4, and 5. Against what nations does Zechariah predict judgments? 9, 1 through 6. What messianic prediction do we find? 9, 9. Where do you find the fulfillment of this? What is the tone of the prophet towards his people in chapters 10, 11, and 12? What remarkable promises are made? Chapter 13, verse 1 and 2, 14, 7 through 9. What expression is used to indicate the general difference of and the reverence for piety in the latter days? 14, 20. How long after the time of Haggai was that of Malachi? What reasons are there for this opinion? Who was the ruler at this time? Have we any later Old Testament scripture than this? Well, some parts of it were written later, because it was still undergoing editing at this time. What are some of the sins denounced, and how do they compare with those described by Nehemiah? Malachi 2, 8 and 11, Nehemiah 13, 23 through 27, and verse 29 as well, Malachi 3, 7 and 9, Nehemiah 9, 34, 35. What kind of offerings does the prophet rebuke them for bringing to the Lord? 1, 8 and 13. What should we always offer the Lord? What declaration is made concerning the universal diffusion of true religion? 1, 11. What prediction of the forerunner and of the Messiah, and what is indicated as the real character of the Messiah's mission? 3, 1 through 3. What distinction is made between the future destinies of the wicked and of the righteous? 4, verse 1 and 2. With what predictions does the prophecy and the Old Testament canon close? What effect would follow the rejection of the overtures? Was this fulfilled in the case of the Jews? Certain worldly consequences for not doing certain things. We could say, well, I only made one mistake. It was like, well, and this other person made all sorts of... The worldly consequences are there as, possibilities. And the consequences of some people's deeds affect other people, and that's the way the world works. So we got to be careful with this moralistic karma stuff, because that's not entirely how it plays out morally. But psychological and spiritual and really spiritual effects are more reliable, more understandable, more predictable if we think about it.